and not my areas of expertise, but certainly defer to these amazing ways that AI is being utilized in research, in clinical models with neuropsych populations, in clinical models with people with serious mental illness, as a tool to therapy and orienting them, testing. And so just so many different areas that it can be utilized. I think really it's sort of endless how it can be utilized.
And thank you for joining us today as we go beyond the couch and explore the world of AI and psychology. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde, a psychologist and AI strategist, and I want to welcome you to Beyond the Couch, AI and Psychology. I'm very excited because this is our first episode, and I know that we have so many good things for you, so I hope that you can join us as we begin to walk through this. But before we start, I want to make sure that I say a quick thank you to our sponsors, without whom the show would not be possible. Firstly, the American Board of Professional Psychology, also known as ABAP, and Wayde AI, which is my consulting company. Okay, so I think we all agree that we're living through this incredible moment where artificial intelligence is beginning to reshape how we understand and practice psychology. From therapy chatbots to AI-powered assessments, from predictive mental health tools to virtual reality treatments, the field is evolving faster than ever. And we also know that with all this innovation comes big questions. What works? What doesn't? What should we be concerned about? How do we maintain the human connection and that therapeutic relationship that's so central to psychological healing? And how do we navigate the ethical challenges that are bound to come up? And this really speaks to the need for this show. So I thought the perfect first guest to help us understand why ABAP thought a show like this is really important and necessary, we would welcome Dr. Jeni McCutcheon. Dr. Jeni McCutcheon has been a licensed psychologist for 25 years, double board certified in clinical psychology and police and public safety psychology through the American Board of Professional Psychology. Along with her other great accomplishments, Jeni is also the current chair of the ABAP Artificial Intelligence Task Force. Jeni, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. But before we dive into the work, I just want to give you an opportunity to just tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us about kind of how you came to be where you are, and really interested in how you became the chair of the AI task force.
Thanks for asking. So I've been a psychologist for a long time, and my practice is in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a PsyPact provider, so I can practice telehealth into 40 plus states now, which is exciting. I think that's a reflection of our 2025 world, right? Where we can do things remotely. So my practice centers around two different populations. I am a clinician at heart, and I do a lot of assessment. So I work primarily with police and public safety populations. So I serve on a daily basis all of those public servants that serve us as citizens, and my practice in that domain is dedicated to clinical assessment, so pre-employment evaluations primarily, and then I also provide services in consultation and intervention areas, so therapy, assistance with critical incidents, trauma type situations, situations where people who are law enforcement or police and public safety personnel have trouble, just like the rest of us would, things like relational issues, financial issues, depression, anxiety, but on top of that as well, the critical incidents that they respond to, things like child drownings, homicides, suicide attempts, and crimes. So in that area of my practice, that's about 75 to 80% of my practice. And in that area, I have a business where I have contractors that work for me, and we do thousands of pre-employment evaluations a year and provide hundreds to thousands of clinical services. The other component of my practice it's a clinical practice as well, so it's not just police and public safety. So I serve primarily adults in that practice, sometimes adolescents, and I see them for a variety of issues. They tend to be, I see a lot of physicians, attorneys, school teachers, stay-at-home moms and dads, people with professional careers and working full-time in the home, and just a general clinical practice, a therapy practice there. And then I also provide some teaching and training, some consultation services, and that summarizes my practice. How I became involved with the AI task force, really sort of a gift of an experience. I'm really enjoying it. It's an honor to be the leader of that task force. But of course, I have so many other people working with me in that task force. There's 15 of us on that task force. And so the evolution of the task force is this: about, I guess, a little over a year ago now. So about May of 2024, the current ABEP president, Dr. Rick Day, approached me and asked me if I might consider taking on this role. And I had to laugh because I didn't know a lot about AI at that point. I mean, I was curious, I was interested, I was doing some reading. I thought a little bit like, what is this? I don't know that I understand this very well, but I was already utilizing AI a little bit, just with some of the applications I use, like Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT, but mostly at that point just for fun. I was not integrating it very much into my practice personally, but I was interested in it. I have kids. They're 11 and 14, and my 14-year-old was just fascinated by science, and he was kind of into AI. So it was something that was on my radar, but it wasn't something I knew a lot about. So when Dr. Day asked me if I wanted to be in charge of this, I was flattered and appreciative, and I also thought, I don't know what I'm doing. How can I do this? And but I rose to the challenge, because what he had explained to me, and it's turned out to be true, is, what we're going to do is we're going to assemble and we're going to ask and invite a lot of people who are knowledgeable in this area of practice and knowledgeable about AI, and we're going to pull them all together. And so we work together to come up with this consortium of really wonderful people who are part of this task force. And we're working together to try to figure out, how does AI impact psychology? What are things that we should be aware of and concerned about with use of AI in our field? And so we formed this task force. And so really my role is a leadership role, but really I'm just sort of a captain at the helm. Everyone that I'm working with collaboratively is doing so much hard work in this, and it's really working itself out. People are stepping up and working really hard on our task force. And so I just get to be part of that collaboration and help guide people. So on that task force, we have a whole bunch of people. We have a subject matter expert, yourself. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with you on that task force, Dr. Wayde. And then we have executive leadership of ABEP on there. We have past specialty board presidents. So we have many different specialty boards in ABEP, and so many of our past presidents, we've invited them and they've accepted to be involved. And we have many specialty board members. So our specialists that are board certified in different areas for ABEP. We have members that are also on our task force. But what makes our task force really neat is that many of our committees that are ABEP committees consist of just specialists. But what we did is we decided, as mentioned, to make this a consortium. We really want this to be sort of a brain trust and get different perspectives. And so on this task force, among the membership are not only the specialty board presidents or past presidents, the specialists, but we have members from outside entities that are really important to the field of psychology. So we have members from APA, from the National Register, from ASPPB, from the trust, risk management, insurance. And then, as mentioned, we have right now one subject matter expert. And then we have other people that we're open to having them on subgroups. And I can talk a little bit about sort of the work that our task force is doing. But I just wanted to highlight what makes the task force unique is that we have these outside entities and collaborators that we have partnerships with and that we work with that help, I think, bring a perspective about AI and help us decide what we should be focusing on that isn't just focused on ABEP or just our specialists. I really like that broad view.
Yeah, I love that broad view as well. And I think that coordination and collaboration, as you've described it, is really critical to the effectiveness of the work that's being done in terms of trying to better understand AI and communicate that information to a broader audience. Yeah, I want to thank you for your background. I think that your experience is so broad and so wide that I think this is one of the reasons why I love having you on as the first guest, because I think you represent a great number of people in terms of how you describe AI. People start with AI just sort of tinkering with it and messing around with it. But I know that you've also you developed and grown in the way in which you've used AI in your professional practice. So tell us a little bit about that journey. What was that like for you, and what are you using AI for now in your work?
I use AI on a daily basis, which I think if you had told me maybe a couple of years ago that I would do that, I would have thought, no way. I was initially wary of AI. I still have some cautions about AI, which I can share in a little bit, but I use it on a daily basis. I first started the evolution of use of AI just started for fun. As mentioned, I have a son who's really into science and AI. So we have a product that watches birds outside our backyard and with AI identifies what they are. And so my son and I and my family as a whole, we have a lot of fun just looking at, positive uses of AI. I would make, I mean, I know it's not necessarily the professional aspect, but how AI was utilized before I started really getting into it with my practice is I would make packing lists. We're going on the trip and I'd give it prompts that would help develop a packing list. I would summarize data or information. I would think about something I wanted to convey to someone that was a tough topic, maybe that I needed to have a conversation with a relative. I'd jot down all my thoughts. I would ask AI, I'd give it prompts to say, can you help me state this in a kind but firm manner, conveying, these points. And I just laugh, right? Because it would, particularly if you were really emotional about something, right? AI would take the emotion out of that and be objective
Yeah.
and just state it factually. So I had a lot of fun with AI. My son and I, we would take trips back and forth from school, and my daughter would join in, and we'd ask Chat GPT just a billion jillion questions, and it would come up with ideas. And so I had a lot of fun with that. And then I started thinking about, this isn't something to be afraid of. This is something to utilize. This isn't, I could name any number of movies, right, where AI is going to take over the world and the world's going to end and we're going to be in trouble. And I remember, a long time ago watching the Steven Spielberg AI, the original movie there of, this lonely robot at the bottom of the
Yeah,
earth.
yeah, I
There's
remember
so
that.
much more to this. And it's not stereotypical, right? Like the fear-based, I think, perceptions that at least I can, take ownership that I used to have. So I started to think about if this can be so helpful within my, personal life, how can I utilize this in my professional practice? And so I started, I continually have Copilot up. I have it up all the time while I'm working. I have Chat GPT up sometimes, and I have Chat GPT on my iPhone, so I use that quite often. And I started to utilize it in different ways. So the first couple of ways were I was creating some PowerPoint presentations, and I had over time just updated, presentations. But I thought there was one presentation I was doing for first responders, and I thought I don't want to go give some canned presentation again. And so I put a couple of the slides, I cut and paste and put them into Copilot and just said, rearrange this, use different wording, try to make this interesting, I think was the prompt, and so I gave a couple of different trials of that, and I did utilize that to make the presentation better. I have used it with other PowerPoint presentations to say, I'll just talk and dictate and almost scribe information into a Word document, then cut and paste it into Copilot and say, fix grammar, make professional, and give it some other prompts. Here's my audience, or tone it down, make it less flowery, just a lot of more concise. And
Yeah.
it's really helped me to start to organize data. So first I was just using it in presentations. And then I thought, how can I utilize this in sort of my clinical practice? So what I wanted to think about was, out of respect, one of the concerns that I have about AI is being ethical and using it responsibly, right? So I want to not, as an example, protected health information. So if I do a therapy session,
Yep.
know it's out there, and I'll probably move towards it eventually. I know there are scribe products, and I know there are a variety of note-taking scribe AI platforms or software, and I'll probably eventually move toward that if I find something that I feel comfortable with as far as maintaining, privacy. At this point, I still use just a different patient software system. But in doing that, I started looking at my notes, and I'm always striving to better myself and write better. And so I started thinking with my clinical practice. So I might have a note where I'm observing during the session, I'm observing things and I'm making notes. So I started taking some of that information, no protected health information. So nothing identifying about someone, but maybe things that they said, themes, sort of the soap note format, although I use a different format. And then I would put that into AI. Again, nothing identifying because it's really careful about that. But I would say, organize this and look at themes. First, that started off as just a note-taking process, right? To improve the grammar, improve the writing, make the writing better, which I have to say has been really helpful to me to think about like my writing and improve it and say things different ways. But then when I started saying notice themes, I noticed that clinically that enhanced my work because it would say, for example, themes of, depressed mood. Well, I knew obviously the person was seeking treatment for depression, but then it would say, themes of family of origin issues, or it would summarize the data and pull out themes,
Yep.
which then I think that was the first time that I started really looking at AI as, wow, that could be a collaborative tool. Like it actually is challenging me to think instead of just working for me to summarize or state something more correctly or grammatically correct or with, different speech. So from there, then I thought, well, this works well for clinical work. And so very often in clinical work now, I will sort of utilize something to find a theme. One day I was stuck in a therapy session and I had talked with the patient and I said, I'm really stuck kind of coming up with reframes. I'm cognitive behavioral in my orientation primarily. And so I sort of joked with them and I said, I bet AI would come up with some different reframes for this negative belief. And so this person, they're professional, they work kind of in a professional capacity. And I sort of jokingly said, I wonder if we plug just this negative thought and here's 10 or 20 reframes of how to look at the situation differently. I wonder if that would be helpful. And the person said, go for it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I need to step back for a second. I said, so first of all, I want to clarify, really? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay. So I said, I use Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. And there's lots of great products out there, but that's just one I'm comfortable with. So I said, I use that. I don't plan to put any, I explained what, PHI was, protected health information. I'm not putting anything identifying in there about you at all. I'm only putting in this, negative, kind of the IB or irrational belief or not helpful belief that you have. And, I'd put that in and then I can share with you the reframes. And so they said again, go for it, probably thinking a little bit like, hey, come on, get on with it. But I'm like,
yeah, exciting.
Right? I'm trying to back up and explain how I'm going to use this, getting their consent, informed consent verbally to do that, documenting that in my note, whatever. And then we came up with 20 reframes. Some of them were so funny and so off and so odd, as to not work, which I will say added a little bit of levity to that therapy session. But there were a few, 2 or 3 good reframes in there. And this person, they had been catastrophizing about something. They were really worried about something. They were imagining, the worst case scenario. And this was a helpful tool. So I thought, wow, that's interesting. So use it as sort of a cognitive behavioral reframing tool. I thought that was fantastic. And then in my assessment report writing, I mean, in some ways, AI it's not like it's some new concept to me, right? Because I'll purchase and utilize specialized public safety norm reports to look at my test data, the tests that I utilize and the assessment evaluations. So, that's been using language models probably since they were created, you know. But for me, how I utilize it is I have a behavioral observations section of my report. And I hate things to sound canned. Like I want the work to sound meaningful and original. And, so I'll give a paragraph or two of how someone presented during the interview to give the flavor of how they presented during this job related assessment. And so I started just saying, like, take this sentence or two, like, I'm stuck on this sentence, put it into Copilot and say, fix grammar, make professional, be direct and concise. And so I started utilizing that, and I was like, wow, this is a big deal improvement to my writing. So, and in some ways I was like, wow, that's much needed, because before that I had been writing in sort of fragments. Applicants showed up on time for their scheduled oral appointment. Dress was professional. Grooming was impeccable. They were friendly, professional, and approachable, no concerning behaviors noted or observed. And I would have a couple other mental status type observations in there. And I would put that into Copilot, and it would come out in complete sentences. Was so nice. And, and so I would integrate some of that into my work as well. So those are just some of the ways that I've utilized. And of course, there's many other ways that psychologists can utilize AI, but those are some of the practical ways that I've utilized it.
Oh, I love this. I love this story, Jeni, because there's so much in here. But I think one of the things that really stands out to me, firstly, is how you became comfortable with AI at the very beginning. You used it in your everyday life. You kind of tested it out. Made sure that it was safe, that it was providing you value before you even brought it into your work environment. And I think that's such a great lesson for people who are unsure about AI, right? There's no need to jump right into your work setting. Play with it, test it out, have fun with it before you even start to use it in your work setting.
Yes, it's like I was sort of dipping my toe in the water, like just trying to think about, can I use this? Do I want to use this? And there are some instances where I'm still really cautious to use it, right? Like I don't use a patient software model out there that relies on AI, but I constantly get advertisements to do that. And I think, so if I do that, then I need to change my informed consent forms, right? So people can understand, and ethically I'm providing information that they can consent to about how I utilize it. And so, there's much more development to happen, I'm sure, both with me and, just thinking it through. I think these are things, though, when I talk with other psychologists about how do we utilize AI, or how can you use that in your practice, or just even generally how people are using AI in their personal lives. It's fascinating. It's so interesting to me, the myriad of ways that it can be utilized in a lot of positive uses.
Yeah. And I think I love the example that you gave of how you ended up using it in session with, with your client. That's so amazing that you've gotten to that point where you could even use it in a session, ethically and safely, and gave them the consent, and they gave you the consent to do that. I think that's fantastic that you get to that level. But I also hear a lot from some psychologists about the fear associated with it in terms of where the field is going with AI, and you talk about all the great things it can do, and the outlook for therapy and for the work that we do as psychologists. We're trained, years of training and experience, and some of that feels perhaps a little bit under threat. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, especially having used it and given your journey of how you came from, I don't really know, to, I can use it in my session. What are your thoughts in terms of looking ahead? Where do you think the how do you think AI is going to impact psychology?
Yeah, I think it's going to be utilized more and more. Right. I think the speed and the efficiency of AI is remarkable. For instance, I can labor over a paragraph in a report, with those 3 lines that I want to plug into the AI. I could spend, 10 minutes on that and try to make it sound the best I think it can sound. And then I can plug those 3 sentences that I'm stuck on into AI, and read, like, I sometimes count. I'm like, that was like 3 seconds. Was that even 3 seconds? Like, it's already there, so I think as psychologists find that the efficiency of AI is a tool for them, I think, and people realize the value that it can have, I think there will be much more use of AI. And I mean, I'm a clinician and an assessor in my roles, but certainly AI can be used in so many different ways, right? Like to spot trends and research, to summarize data, just so many different ways in teaching with the PowerPoints and lesson plans and, things like that if you're in academia. So I think there's lots of different ways that psychology will continue to utilize it. One of the really neat things we've done, we have a presentation for ABAP. It's called On Board with Professional Psychology. And so whether you're a specialist or not, that might really interest people who listen to this. And so all you have to do is go to the ABAP website and then look for the onboard publication. We have a lot of AI articles in there, so just sort of put a plug in. There's a specific area of the ABAP website that has AI articles. But in this onboard publication, we're spotlighting psychologists and our specialists that work in the AI space. And so we have a couple of spotlights already out with more forthcoming. And I'm just fascinated by some of the work that these folks are doing with AI. So we have people that are working in neuropsychology. We have, an article upcoming there that's going to talk about, can AI replace your neuropsychologist, which I think automatically strikes fear in the minds of psychologists, right? Because we don't want to be replaced by AI. We want AI to be an adjunct to our practice or our work or a helpful tool. And so I see other areas that psychologists are working in AI that I haven't even thought about, right? And not my areas of expertise, but certainly defer to these amazing ways that AI is being utilized in research, in clinical models with neuropsych populations, in clinical models with people with serious mental illness, as a tool to therapy and orienting them, reality testing. And so just so many different areas that it can be utilized. I think really it's sort of endless how it can be utilized.
Yeah, I love that, talking about the utility of AI and how it can help with efficiencies and help us improve. And so I definitely agree. I think it's, we're finding it being more and more usable as people become more and more comfortable. I think it's definitely going to become more integrated. And I think this is why this platform and other platforms, like you mentioned, articles and other things, are so important to help us figure out how do we adapt, how do we adjust. There's so many ethical questions that are going to come up and that have already come up around this, and so there needs to be a way for us to communicate and share this information. And so I think this is the additional value of something like this podcast. And I want to also put in a plug in. If you're working in AI, if you're a psychologist, you have any experience with AI, or you want to come and talk about what you're seeing is how AI is impacting the field, please come on the show and share your thoughts and your insights and your experiences. We definitely want to make this a broad platform for that as well. Jeni, I want to be respectful of your time. There's so much we could get into right now, but I want to make sure that we're being respectful of yours and other people's time. So I just want to ask you, because I'm going to ask everybody that comes on the show, given your experience and given the way in which you have adapted and grown with AI, what are some tips, or what's a tip that you have for the audience? What would you like to share from that perspective?
It's a great question. I think a few things. So I would first offer, try it out, have your own experience of AI. And if you're hesitant to use this in your professional work, I think you can start off maybe like I did, where you toy with it and you experiment with it in your personal life and you see the utility and the value of it. I think if you're going to use this in your clinical work, particularly you're going to have it rewrite a whole report, or you're going to use it to scribe a session or interpret a session, you should definitely be ethical. And an example of that certainly is seeking informed consent about that, being transparent about your use. I don't think you should use AI blindly, not saying that anyone would, but it can be biased. It can hallucinate. So I think you have to check and maybe double and triple check, the use of AI. Funny example of that is I'm working on a presentation. It's an upcoming professional presentation. And after searching through APA databases and kind of coming up short for very recent references and things that I want to read and update and maybe incorporate and cite in my presentation, I decided to use AI to see if there was anything out there in the public domain or other, maybe medical sources other related medical fields that I'm missing that might relate to this topic. And it came up with like 5 resources. And so I did the search with different, with ChatGPT and Copilot, and kept coming back to Copilot really. And it came up with some similar resources. And so I went and checked those out. And 2 of them were something that I already knew about. A third was a neat resource that I did not know about. And the 4th and the 5th ones were really like kind of gobbledygook, but they came with links, and I kept clicking on the links, and the links didn't work. So I just was being sort of tongue in cheek, and I wrote back to Copilot and I said, I don't think this is a real reference. Is this a real reference? And I caught it in the hallucination, and I wrote back, and I wish still that I had like screenshot it because it was so cool, but it said something like, maybe this is not, basically it wasn't accurate. And I was like, okay, so, but for me, it was a good example. Like, I remember teaching at the graduate level, and you would have a student cite a reference, right? But they cited a reference that came from another reference.
Yeah.
They had read the main reference that they cited, but they hadn't read the other references.
The actual original. Yeah.
Yeah, the original. And I think a little bit about that. Like, if we just use AI and we don't double check it, you risk then having incredibly sometimes incorrect information. So you can't rely on that. Like, you still have to be, I think you have to be the overseer. You have to have oversight, right?
Yeah.
And then I would say, like, I guess lastly, I would just say, be ethical, be aware of like privacy and confidentiality concerns. And as well as, I think we have to be careful about the use of AI. Like, I'm cautious of the idea. I still want to provide therapy in session to people. And so I sometimes will have patients ask, what do you think of the bots and people that do, I shouldn't even say people, like the entity, the AI that does therapy.
Agent,
yeah. And I know there's some research that actually there was a case, and you and I have talked about this, Dr. Wayde, where, someone was receiving, I guess, therapy, clinical services. I don't know what we want to call it, right? They were receiving services from a bot, and they preferred that over services with a mental health professional. And so, but then I worry because that can be risky. Like, how do we know what that bot is going to advise someone to do? And if a person is making that connection with the bot, like, where's the oversight of that? So I think, like, my overall thoughts about AI are, to use it, be transparent about it, try to be ethical in practice, be aware of some of its limitations and provide oversight, and then be aware of ramifications potentially for use of AI. Just keep it in mind, good practice, what creates good services to the clients and the populations that we serve.
Yeah, I think those are such great pieces of advice, especially I think because when we're using AI, there's an element of trust that you have to give when you're using these things, because you don't always know how they're trained or how they're going to behave. But there's also an element of risk associated with that, just because you don't know that. And so I think it's really important to balance that trust and risk with validation, right? Like, definitely validate what it tells you, double check it, and make sure that it makes sense, because as you said, these things can hallucinate it, absolutely. And so it's really important that you continue, even as you're using it, to take that responsibility of that final product and whatever it is that you end up using from that. So absolutely makes sense. So
makes sense.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. As I said, there's so much that we didn't get to. So we're just going to have you come back at some point and talk more about kind of your experience with AI and all the great things that you're doing with it. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Really appreciate being here. I can't wait to see the other guests. Be fascinating.
Yes, we've got some great guests lined up, and I invite you people to come back. And for our audience, thank you so much for listening to our very first show. If you've enjoyed this experience, please subscribe and come back and join us in future episodes and leave us feedback. Feedback is a gift, and we love gifts. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what you would like to see more of, so that we can continue to make this valuable for all of you. Thanks again for joining us on the show, and we hope to see you again.